I'm Erin Reynolds, and I'm the Chief Mollusk of Flying Mollusk. I've been making games professionally for about 15 years, and at Flying Mollusk, we make what we call edgy games for good. So in other words, games that both entertain and benefit the player. And we're most well known for a biofeedback enhanced game called Nevermind that responds in real time to feelings of fear and stress. And we're currently working on a new project that also involves emotion intelligence. And this topic of emotional intelligence in games is something that has always been fascinating to me. Experiences that understand and adapt to each player's unique fingerprint of who they are. Everything that they bring to the experience, their past, their interests, and all the countless little things that make them them. No one experiences a game with the same pair of eyes. And that's probably common sense for most of us. We're all game developers here after all. However, not only is every player's experience shaped by both the game and what the player brings to it, every game is inherently a unique reflection of the team that made it. Everything the developers bring to the creation experience, who they are, what they are going through, their hopes, their dreams, their struggles and triumphs, all become part of the DNA of the game experience. And a team is inherently made up of a number of very different individuals. And the ability for the team to elevate each other's unique strengths will ultimately determine whether they're able to successfully make something special together. And while that may feel like, again, common sense, I found that it isn't really something that we actively think about or talk about all that much. I mean, we know that having a team with a diverse set of strengths, weaknesses, and skill sets is critical to achieving success. But I think that it can be difficult to know how best to collaborate with and even better elevate those who work and think differently than us. And, it's only natural to fall into a rhythm of assuming that folks, more or less, like to interact and approach problems in the same way that we do. And objectively, of course, that may seem silly. But, in practice, I think it's something that we all can be guilty of. I know that I have been. And, tragically, that mindset and approach to game development can create incidental barriers that can hold individuals and teams back. So this talk is intended to provide an overview of some of the ways that different folks approach, different scenarios in the workplace, and how you can, develop a better applied understanding of, how they think and feel, so that you can not only help to create a better work environment for your peers, but also leverage those same techniques to make more diverse and unique experiences for your players. So to start, I want to say that I get it. This may all sound a little common sense at best, and maybe even a little hippy-dippy at worst. However, I want to give this talk because while I think that we, may all know why it's important, knowing the how can sometimes be a bit more tricky in practice. Okay, so there are many different systems out there that try to define and organize different ways that people think, feel, and perceive the world. You may already be familiar with some of those systems, but for context, I want to touch upon just a few very briefly and to give a very grossly oversimplified overview. So, some of these systems manifest themselves as personality trait classifications. Perhaps one of the most well-known of these is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator System, or the MBTI, or Myers-Briggs for short. The MBTI is essentially a system for classifying personality traits based on a number of categories. Each one of these categories is assigned a letter, and the person type is determined by the combination of these letters. This combination is then often assigned an archetype. So, for example, someone whose personality is classified as an INTP is given the archetype of the architect, and they're said to be very logical and analytical. Or an ESFJ is given the archetype of the provider, and they're said to be very amenable and loyal. And once you have your Myers-Briggs type, you can find out which Pokemon type or Sonic character you are, which is very important. Then there's the Gallup's Clifton Strengths Finder model that points to an individual's strengths based on a self-assessment system. There's Richard Bartle's taxonomy of player types that essentially classifies players according to what kind of gameplay actions they're drawn to. And there are so many other systems out there that are designed to help us wrap our heads around how different people think and act differently. And the notion of codifying the nuanced complexities of personalities into a simple, digestible format really isn't anything new. I mean, look at astrology, right? Questionable classification methods aside, in many ways, it's a system designed to help codify, understand, and talk about how we all act and think differently. And it's something that I think we're all inherently curious about on some level. I mean, who here hasn't taken a BuzzFeed quiz to find out what cookie they are? I mean, classic chocolate chip cookie right here, am I right? So, there are hundreds of different models that you can look at, which makes sense since a human being is a very complex creature. But there's really no one way to break down what comprises a person's personality. I mean, let's be honest, at the end of the day, by and large, many of these systems are some sort of pseudoscience, and some may even come from dubious origins. However, despite all that, they do nonetheless offer some genuinely helpful benefits. However, despite all that, they do nonetheless offer some genuinely helpful benefits. Systems like these help us codify different ways, tools to help point out areas where folks might be inherently different and give us a vocabulary or a frame of reference to enable us to engage with and process those differences in a constructive way. So, for example, the next time you're frustrated by someone's actions in the workplace, you can maybe fall back on these classifications as a way to help you look at things from a fresh perspective and help you recontextualize the situation in a more constructive way. And then finally, these systems like these can help you feel like you're not alone. For me personally, this is a big one, and I'll talk about that more in the context of game development in a moment. However, broadly speaking, seeing different modes of thinking and behavior written out in a way that puts them on equal footing can be really powerful in dispelling one's own insecurities about the way that they operate. It can make you feel less like a weirdo and a freak and understand yourself in a broader context as a whole. Of course, for every benefit that these systems can offer, there's an equal amount of disclaimers that must be expressed. First, these systems can be a great tool when it comes to getting outside of your own head, when it comes to understanding yourself and other people. However, all of them should be taken with a massive grain of salt. They should not be used for definitive self-diagnosing or the diagnosis of others. Plus, the fact that many of these systems commonly rely on folks taking the test themselves leaves the door wide open for massive confirmation bias of how people want to see themselves as opposed to how they may actually operate. And I think that there can be a temptation to use it as a way to conveniently put someone, or even yourself, in a box. So, needless to say, please don't do that. Once again, these systems are best used as simply a tool for understanding how to get outside of your own head and as a jumping off point for communication. It's always better to understand the whole person as opposed to just the label. There is no one way to define who someone is. Each of these models are simply different ways to look at the fact that we're all very, very complicated meat computers who process and output information in our own individual, unique way. And, while I just now mentioned a bunch of personality-based systems out there, when I talk about recognizing and celebrating what makes all of us different, I'm referring to everything that makes each person who they are. So I've always had a casual interest in this, but the more time I spent in the industry operating in various capacities, the more helpful this understanding became to me, both in terms of my own growth as a game developer and also as a leader managing others. So I'd like to share one personal example of how it helped me. One of the more classic and well-known Myers-Briggs attributes is introvert versus extrovert. And by every measure of it, I'm about as extreme of an introvert as anyone can get. And there are lots of different ways to define introvert versus extrovert. However, basically, and again, this is an oversimplification, an introvert is someone who recharges their energy by being alone, whereas an extrovert recharges their energy by being around people. And there's actually already a great GDC talk about being an introvert. Look up Cecile Hemry's 2019 GDC talk titled Introverts in the Workplace. It's up on YouTube, and I highly recommend checking that out. But anyway, back to me. Being an introvert was a massive challenge early in my career because, because I'm naturally introverted, I found myself, I found the act of constantly collaborating with other people, which, is an essential part of being a game designer more often than not, to be eternally draining. And instead of using lunches to network or catch up with my work buddies, I'd have to grab lunch and hide so that I could be alone and recharge. Because if I didn't, I'd be a zombie for the rest of the day. I would get so tired at conferences from being around people all day that I would be in physical pain from the exhaustion. So, being an introvert, or I should say my lack of understanding of myself as an introvert, became a real detriment to my growth as a game developer and eventually as a leader. I started to believe that those who loved being social and didn't seem to need the quiet time that I did were people who were simply more outgoing and charismatic than I ever could be. And it felt like people like that seemed to find more opportunities and were more effective at their jobs. And this left me constantly feeling like there was something wrong with me, which really diminished my confidence to take on leadership roles. And it led me to force myself as hard as I could to try to be an extrovert. And as a result, I became overly exhausted and counterproductively worse at everything I did. And it caused me to undervalue the strengths that come with being an introvert. I couldn't show up as my best self because I didn't understand why I was different. I assumed I was just worse than other people, instead of appreciating it as an opportunity to let my differences shine and complement the team around me. So I started to fall into a downward spiral of exhaustion, low confidence, and many times it actually caused me to question if I even belonged in games. But clearly, since I'm not only still in the industry, but also speaking here today, I managed to overcome that. So what broke that spiral? As a game designer, I've always had a natural interest in what makes people tick. So I kind of challenged that energy into trying to figure out why I felt so different from so many of my peers in game design, production, and game development leadership. And this curiosity in part led me to learn about introversion and some of the other personality models I mentioned earlier. And what this knowledge did was, first and foremost, help me feel like I wasn't alone. And the more I read about being an introvert, the more I realized that what I was experiencing was totally natural for like 50% of the population. So I wasn't some kind of weirdo who was doomed to never fit in. No, I just thought differently and I worked differently and interacted differently than some of my colleagues. And that's really cool. Different is cool, especially because it also means that I had some different strengths to offer that I hadn't yet fully appreciated. And so from there, I started to be more candid with others about what I was feeling and what I needed. Not, in a confrontational way or anything like that, but just in a way that was matter of fact. Whereas, in the past, I would hide to eat lunches by myself to recharge. I started just frankly saying to people, look, I'd love to get lunch with you today, but I just need a little recharge time. And you know what? People, by and large, respected that. And I had more energy than ever because I was getting what I needed and didn't have the burden of always feeling like I was doing something wrong. And I was able to go beyond just fixing things that weren't working for me. I felt empowered to find new things to charge me up even further. So I started to do things like take solo walks after an afternoon break, honoring introvert time at busy events like conferences, even putting in headphones to listen to music to quiet down the outside world during small moments throughout the day. And actions like these added up to make me more me in the best possible ways. And it also helped me celebrate my own strengths. The knowledge of what an introvert is and that I am one and that it is okay helped me accept that there are some things that I'm just not as naturally adept at. But there are some things that I am naturally geared to have an affinity for. And again, all the disclaimers I mentioned about classifications like this apply. So I'm speaking in very, very broad generic terms here. So don't forget that, please. Anyway, so for example, this knowledge gave me permission to own and celebrate that I'm adept at, thinking through problems and being extra precise. Whoops. There we go. That makes more sense. Extra adept at thinking through problems, being extra precise in how I communicate to others, and when being prolific when left alone for long periods of time. And these are all qualities that are just as useful for game design and production and eventually leadership as the more naturally extroverted qualities of being very network focused and able to work in large groups for a long period of time without needing a nap afterwards. So fueled by these insights that, there we are, that I'm not an incompetent weirdo for how I think and work, that communicating my needs to others is totally okay, And it makes things 1,000 times better than forcing myself to be someone else and taking the time and actions I need to be my best. I was actually better equipped to tackle some of my natural weaknesses too. Ironically enough, by celebrating my introverted qualities, I was better able to manage more extrovert-oriented situations because the new habits I put into place gave me more energy to begin with. So, seeing myself and others from the perspective of one codified system of personalities had an important positive impact on my work and my career and how I viewed myself. And so naturally, I wanted everyone to experience the same epiphany. For folks to see, that all of their unique attributes, whether one may consider them positive or negative, is what makes them them, and to understand and own their strengths, and to better compartmentalize their weaknesses so that they're easier to identify and improve upon rather than, remaining difficult to articulate and consequently being left buried deep within a person's sense of identity and self-worth. And ultimately, I realized the importance of people better understanding themselves. And, even though I wasn't consciously thinking about it in this light at the time, I think my work in creating emotionally intelligent games reflect this idea of knowing more about ourselves and others as being something that is incredibly important. So, for example, Flying Mollusk's first game, Nevermind, is in many ways a reflection of my experience as an introvert. And Nevermind, you must learn to brave uncertain and uncomfortable situations by proceeding into nerve-wracking situations and learning how to calm down in the face of them. And that process represents how I often felt. And I think it's a feeling or a skill that, we all kind of experience and are forced to develop to some degree when it comes to discovering and owning our own unique blend of strengths and weaknesses. And of course, it influenced the way that I manage teams too. So at Flying Mollusk, I try to be sensitive to create multiple avenues for folks to do their best work, express themselves, and process information. And while I keep the various models I mentioned earlier in mind, I base team interactions less on things like specific systems, like the Myers-Briggs system, and more on just trying to learn what's best for my team members as individuals. And so, part of doing that is helping them be as educated about what supports their own professional well-being as much as possible. So this is so that I can help facilitate that as opposed to psychoanalyzing them from afar, because nobody wants me doing that. So for example, this could include things like having a casual conversation about this topic. And it doesn't need to be a serious navel-gazing deep dive, but just discussing it as a point of interest may encourage folks to start thinking about things and how it pertains to them more. So, for example, kicking off a conversation with a coworker that might start out as something like, what's your favorite Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle and why? Or simply, do you prefer meetings that are structured or more loose? The key is to approach it from a place of genuine curiosity. So that means really listening, processing, and respecting what folks have to say. I also try to be as open and honest about how I perceive things and some of the strengths and weaknesses that I think I have. And so my introvert story is an example of this. And then there's discussing ways to change up some of our processes, like meetings or retrospectives. So for example, if a teammate has a habit of never speaking up in a meeting, but then approaches you with relevant information like 20 minutes after the meeting, instead of being exasperated and wishing that they said something during the meeting, maybe ask that colleague with, again, curiosity and respect, why they prefer to tell you the information now and not during the meeting. Did they need time to think about the information from the meeting first? Were they not comfortable speaking up in the meeting? Did they not get a chance to speak up? And then from there, see if something needs to be changed up, whether it's the format of the meeting, maybe your expectations for when you'll be hearing ideas from the colleague, stuff like that. And, have fun with it. Be creative with it. It doesn't need to be confrontational or anything like that. And you never know who else on the team might benefit from it. And, although many of the experience described here are largely from a pre-COVID era, with the processes for how we work and communicate now being remixed anyway, with so many of us working from home, it can be a really great opportunity to take a step back and take these things into consideration as things are being redefined on both the micro and macro level. And, it goes without saying, but I've by no means completely figured this out. and everyone's circumstances are inherently different. And I acknowledge that it's easier for me to get buy-in into these principles as the owner of a studio than it might be for an individual on a given team. But I think that the goals of self-awareness and an understanding of how different we might be from those around us and how that's ultimately okay and really kind of awesome is a powerful mindset that can be effectively applied anywhere. Not only does this approach help to enable everyone on a team to operate at their best, I also genuinely believe that more intelligent, emotionally intelligent teams will create more emotionally intelligent games. So why are emotionally intelligent games important? Well, because players are people too. And players will have different ways that they naturally approach your game's mechanics, narratives, UX, everything. Some will gravitate towards some things and bounce off of others. And again, like I know that this is common sense, but a more emotionally aware team will be able to more intuitively think, how would X person think about this encounter or character or mechanics, as opposed to just immediately thinking of players as being exactly like themselves. Emotionally intelligent games can be better structured for and or adapt to players' unique differences. So it's a better experience for players all around, which is always a good thing. And that same emotional intelligence muscle that we've been developing can also enable us to tell more interesting stories. I mean, stories come from conflict. And the inherent differences between folks with shared goals is one of the many classic story dynamics. By being more fluent in how similar and different people are, the more your stories, your characters, and relationships will resonate with players as feeling relatable and authentic. So in my experience, it's so easy to fall into the assumption that everyone thinks and works in the same way that we do. But, and when we put ourselves in someone else's shoes, we often fail to put ourselves in someone else's brain as part of that, to not only try to understand someone based on their known situation and circumstances, but also based on the internal processes that make them them. And assuming that everyone thinks and feels like we do can lead to a host of misunderstandings and missed opportunities on both a small and large scale. And I think that this clip from Comedy Central's Key and Peele does a really good job of summarizing what that could look like.
Egan's been texting me. Sorry, dude. Missed your texts. I assumed we'd meet at the bar. Whatever. I don't care.
Sorry, dude. Missed your texts. I assumed we'd meet at the bar. Whatever, I don't care. Whatever, I don't care?
So here's what I encourage each of you to consider doing for the sake of helping yourselves, your fellow team members, and your games truly shine. Yes, do whatever it takes to keep reminding yourself that folks don't necessarily listen, think, and process information, work, relax, all that in the same way that you do. But most importantly, listen to folks about who they are and how they best work. And you can actively listen by asking them directly, or you can, of course, listen passively by just observing how someone seems to work most comfortably. And once you have a sense of how your teammates work best, respect that and find ways to elevate what works best for them and minimize what might impede them. And this will start opening opportunities that will really help them shine. And this all applies whether you're a manager, a coworker, or even when it comes to just helping yourself, like I did. Admittedly, the tricky thing is that many people don't even know exactly what it is that they need. But by making an effort to be more aware of people's differences and understanding them, you might be able to help them in ways that even they couldn't yet articulate. So, in short, here are some quick tools. Always listen, and this is most important. Listen to yourself and listen to others. Familiarize yourself with some of the ways that we all differ. So, read up on the different personality models as long as you promise to keep the caveats I mentioned earlier in mind. Educate yourself in the details of neurotypical and neurodivergent folks. Become familiar with different gender identities, cultures, everything. Everything is valuable to you and those around you. And then get creative with breaking up the norms of various processes and practices. Be in meetings or the way you collect and give feedback or collaboration, how you network. And I promise that by simply understanding, listening, and respecting the many wonderful ways that we're all different will make you and your team more powerful than ever before. And your games and your players will definitely reap the benefits. Thank you.